I will fit my every inch into your innocent body, the Lycan King said, his voice echoing through the castle halls. Every scar, every failure, every moment of weakness I've hidden behind this crown. You wanted honesty, little Omega. Can you handle the weight of who I really am? Elara stood frozen in the doorway of the Grand Library, rainwater still dripping from her tattered cloak. This wasn't what she'd expected when she'd stumbled into the castle seeking shelter from the storm. She'd expected cruelty, perhaps. Dismissal, certainly. Maybe even kindness if she was lucky, but not this. Not vulnerability wrapped in a challenge. Not a king who looked at her like she held the answer to a question he'd been asking for years. Let me go back to the beginning. The storm had been raging for 3 days when Elara first saw the castle. Rain hammered against the forest canopy above her, each drop finding its way through the leaves to soak her already drenched body. Her feet, wrapped in cloth that had long since given up being called shoes, stumbled over roots she could barely see in the darkness. She was an Omega, the lowest rank in the pack hierarchy. The weakest link, the one nobody missed when she disappeared into the woods. But Elara hadn't run away by choice. Her village had cast her out, claiming she brought bad luck. 3 harsh winters, 2 failed harvests, 1 mysterious illness that took the elder's favorite grandson. Somehow all of it became her fault. That's how it worked when you were Omega. Everything wrong was your burden to bear. The castle loomed before her now, all sharp towers and darker shadows. Lightning split the sky, illuminating stone walls that seemed to go on forever. She should have been afraid. Any sensible person would have turned back. But Elara had nowhere else to go, and the cold was seeping into her bones with a determination that promised she wouldn't survive another night in the open. The massive wooden doors stood slightly ajar, an invitation or perhaps a trap. Elara was too tired to care which. She pushed through and warmth hit her like a physical thing. Torches lined the entrance hall, their flames dancing in the draft she'd let in. The doors swung shut behind her with a sound like thunder, and she jumped, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lost, little wolf? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Deep, commanding, the kind of voice that expected obedience without question. Elara turned in a slow circle, searching the shadows. I need shelter. Just for the night. I'll leave at first light. I promise I won't be any trouble. A laugh echoed through the hall. Not cruel, but not kind either. Amused, perhaps. Trouble seems to follow Omegas wherever they go. Or so I'm told. He stepped into the light then. The Lycan King. She'd heard stories, of course. Everyone had. A ruler who commanded absolute loyalty. A warrior who'd never lost a battle. A man who could shift into a beast so powerful that even speaking his name was considered dangerous in some circles. But the stories hadn't mentioned how tired he looked. Oh, he was imposing. Tall and broad, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes that seemed to glow amber in the torchlight. He wore his crown like it weighed nothing, but Elara could see the tension in his jaw, the shadows under those striking eyes. This was a man who hadn't slept well in a very long time. I'm Elara, she said, because silence felt more dangerous than speaking. I won't steal anything. I don't have anything to steal with anyway. He studied her for a long moment.
Kaelin, he finally offered.
And you can stay. But there's a price for sanctuary in my castle. Of course there was. Elara's shoulders sagged. Nothing came free, especially not for Omegas. What do you want? Honesty. He moved closer, and she forced herself not to step back. I will ask you questions and you will answer truthfully. That's all. It seemed too simple. But Elara nodded anyway. All right. He led her through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, past rooms filled with treasures and others that sat empty and echoing. Finally, they reached the library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves overflowed with books, and a fire crackled in a hearth large enough to stand in. 2 chairs sat before it, looking almost lonely in such a vast space. Sit, Kaelin said, gesturing to one of the chairs. You're shivering, she was. Elara sank into the chair, and it was so soft she almost cried. When had she last sat on anything that wasn't cold ground or rough stone? Kaelin poured something from a crystal decanter and handed her a glass. Drink, it'll warm you. The liquid burned going down, but he was right. Heat spread through her chest, reaching fingers and toes that had gone numb. She took another careful sip, then set the glass down with shaking hands. First question, Kaelin said, settling into the other chair. Why did they cast you out? Elara stared into the fire. This part always hurt. They blamed me for their bad fortune. Omegas are convenient scapegoats. We're weak, so we can't fight back. We're low-ranking, so nobody questions it when we disappear. And if things get better after we're gone, well, then it must have been our fault all along. And if things don't get better, she laughed, but there was no humor in it, then nobody remembers we existed in the first place. Kalen was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had softened. Second question, are you afraid of me? Elara considered lying. But he'd asked for honesty, and somehow she didn't want to disappoint him. A little, she admitted. You're the lycan king. You could kill me without trying. But I'm more afraid of going back out into the storm. At least here I'm warm. That's something. You have low standards for happiness. You have high standards for most things, I imagine, she countered. When you're Omega, you learn to be grateful for small mercies. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable. Instead, Elara found herself meeting his gaze steadily. She'd already lost everything. What more could she lose now? Third question, Kalen said slowly. What do you want, Elara? If you could have anything in this world, what would it be? No one had ever asked her that before. The question itself felt like a gift, and Elara turned it over in her mind, searching for the true answer. Not the safe one, not the expected one. The real one. To matter, she finally whispered. Not to be powerful or wealthy or any of that. Just to matter to someone, to be something other than a burden or a scapegoat, to be seen. Kalen stood abruptly, and for a moment Elara thought she'd said something wrong, but he walked to the window, staring out at the storm. Lightning illuminated his profile, all sharp angles and barely contained emotion. And that's when he said it. The words that had stopped her cold in the doorway of memory. I'm cursed, he began. 5 years ago, a witch I sentenced for her crimes cast a spell before she died. Every day I grow weaker. My strength, my authority, everything that makes me who I am, it's fading, slowly, but inevitably. He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. I will fit my every inch into your innocent body. Every scar, every failure, every moment of weakness I've hidden behind this crown. The curse can only be broken by someone who sees me, not the king, not the warrior, not the beast, me, the actual person underneath all the titles and expectations. Elara's breath caught. You want me to carry that? I want someone to know it exists, he said quietly. For 5 years I've carried this alone, pretending I'm not dying from the inside out, pretending the crown doesn't feel heavier every day. I've tried everything. Mages, rituals, sacrifices, nothing works. The curse only breaks when someone chooses to stay for the right reasons. Not duty, not fear, not ambition. Just choice. He laughed, bitter and tired. But how can anyone see the real me when they can't get past the crown? Elara rose from her chair, moving to stand beside him at the window. The storm was finally beginning to ease. Rain fell in sheets rather than walls, and the lightning had moved farther away. You're tired, she said softly. That's the first thing I noticed. Not how powerful you are, not how dangerous. How tired. You carry everything alone, don't you? All the decisions, all the responsibility. Everyone expects you to have answers, to be strong, to never falter. But you're just a person. People get tired. Kalen's hand found hers. His fingers were warm, his grip gentle despite the strength she could feel coiled in him. You see me, he said, and it wasn't a question. You saw me first, Elara replied. You asked what I wanted. Nobody asks Omegas what we want. We're told what we're for, and that's supposed to be enough. She squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of what he'd asked. To carry his truth. To know him beyond the crown. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with bodies and everything to do with souls. I can handle it, she said finally. Your weight, your truth, all of it. Not because I'm strong, I'm not. But because I know what it's like to be invisible. To have people look at you and only see what they expect. If you want to fit every inch of who you really are into my understanding, my awareness, then yes, I can hold that. I want to hold that. They stood together in silence, watching the storm fade. Elara felt something shifting in the air between them. Not magic exactly, something quieter but no less powerful. Recognition. Understanding. The simple acknowledgement that they were both people who'd been reduced to what others needed them to be, rather than who they truly were. The curse broke like glass shattering. They both felt it, a sudden absence of weight as though invisible chains had fallen away. Kalen gasped. his hand tightening on hers, and Elara watched in wonder as color returned to his face, as the shadows lifted from his eyes. It worked, he breathed. After 5 years it actually worked. Because it was real, Elara said. You didn't try to manipulate me. You didn't promise me the world if I'd just say the right words. You gave me choice. You showed me who you really are, all of it, and let me decide if I could handle that truth. That's what broke it. Not love at first sight. Not some grand gesture. Just respect. Basic human respect. Kaelin pulled her into his arms and Elara let herself be held. She understood now what he'd meant. She carried him now, in a way. Knew his fears and failures. Saw past the crown to the man who wore it. And somehow that knowing didn't make him smaller. It made him real. I don't know how this works, Kaelin murmured against her hair. Building something real between people from such different worlds. But I want to try. If you do, Elara smiled against his chest. I'm Omega. You're a king. It shouldn't work at all, but maybe that's exactly why it will. We've both spent our whole lives being told what we're supposed to be. Maybe it's time we figure out who we actually are instead. Outside, the storm had passed completely. Dawn light filtered through the windows, painting everything gold. A new day, a new beginning. They would face challenges, Elara knew. Courts didn't accept Omegas easily. Old prejudices died hard. But standing there in Kaelin's arms, watching the sunrise together, she felt something she'd never felt before. Hope. Not for some fairy tale ending where everything was perfect, but for something real, something built on choice and honesty, and the simple recognition that everyone, from Omegas to kings, deserved to be seen for who they truly were. Thank you, Kaelin whispered, for seeing me, for staying, for being strong enough to carry my truth. Thank you, Elara replied, for trusting me with it, for giving me choice, for seeing me too. And in that moment, curse broken and storm past, two people who'd been alone for far too long realized they didn't have to be alone anymore. They could fit into each other's lives, each other's truths, each other's hearts. Not as Omega and King, but as two people who'd finally found someone brave enough to see them clearly. They just had to be themselves. Together, the storm was over. The dawn had come, and for the first time in either of their lives, they weren't facing it alone.